I always feel like when we get to this point in the Easter season and we're deep in the Gospel of John, that we're hearing Jesus tell us riddles. I have no idea what that passage could possibly be about. And someday, one of you all will have to say to me, Brian, we're going to hold you accountable to preaching on John's Gospel, but it's not going to be today. I've always loved that story from the first reading in Acts, because I think we could almost guess, we could say about Paul, see, he was an Episcopalian too. Look at him go and try to reach out to the seekers there in Athens. He's like drawing on Greek philosophers. God is the one in whom we live and move and have our being. That's not from the Bible. He got that from some Greek poet or philosopher. He's trying to put his Jewish faith and his faith in Jesus in language that they can understand so that maybe they also will come and join him. He's even very generous to them about their religious practices. I mean, if you read his own letters, he's pretty nasty about all of those idols and things. But today he's really warm and he's generous about how religious, extremely religious they are. Now, as Jennifer just said before the liturgy, though, context is king here. That's not the whole story, not at all. Once again, we've been given the sweetest part, the nicest little part of the story. But before and after, it's full of argument and a little bit ugly. Paul had been roaming through Athens disgusted, absolutely disgusted by the fact that on every corner there was some altar, some idol, something to an unknown god. He was so offended by it that he kept arguing with the Athenians about it. They thought he was an idiot. Remember, it's Athens. They're all very smart and full of philosophers. So they called him a babbler and accused him of trying to introduce a new religion about Jesus and something called resurrection, which they presumed to be a kind of goddess that was Jesus' spouse or consort. He bugged them so much, they finally said, yeah, come to the Areopagus, come to where we talk, and explain all that to us, because they thought they could make fun of him. And in fact, right before this passage, this is a lovely little acid line from the author who says, because, the Athenians didn't ever do anything but go sit around and talk about nonsense. It wasn't a happy story. So then he gets in there and he talks to them, and they finally say, half of them go, this is nuts, go away. The other half of them say, maybe we'll listen to you more about this later, which is a way of dismissing him. As we say in the South, bless your heart. We won't hear any more about that. By the end of it, Paul is denouncing them, telling them if they don't abandon their idols, God's judgment is going to fall upon them. So I'm not really sure we told that story the way it's meant to be heard. The thing about it is, though, is that as much as we as Episcopalians would love to make sure that everyone feels welcome and that we're ready to accept everyone's questions, Paul is reminding us that when we tell the good news, we actually have to make some judgments. We have to actually distinguish between right and wrong, good and beautiful, and we have to speak about it, even when it's uncomfortable. One of the criticisms we might have made of Athens at the time is that they were just covering the city with gods to make sure they had all their bases covered, so they wouldn't make one mad and then you destroy the city. So you just scatter gods everywhere and put some blank altars so that you don't make that god you don't know angry. But they weren't asking what it meant to serve God, or what responsibilities we have to one another if we belong to a religious tradition, or even what's good or true at all. That might sound familiar in our own world filled with all kinds of idols. At the same time, the Athenians were asking hard questions of Paul and didn't like his answers. We might have hard questions like that too. I've been thinking about some this week. Why does God, in whom we live and move and have our being, permit all these catastrophes, from climate change to war, when we know full well that those catastrophes fall on people that are already vulnerable? We talk about how God is the source and parent of all, but in our extremely religious society, we tolerate all kinds of violence and cruelty against God's offspring, whether it's because of their color, their immigration status. Jesus says he'll leave no one orphaned. And all this goes on in the world in which all kinds of people are orphaned by these things, and some people are completely forgotten. No one pays any attention to them at all. Those are the kinds of hard questions that the Athenians might be asking that people are asking now. What hard questions do you live with? How do you try to answer them? Because I think we can be honest and say there's not much difference between ancient Athens and all their gods and idols, and our own culture today with our own versions, different kinds of idols based on politics or race or economics, you name them. All kinds of ways in which people don't engage what is true or what is good, what our responsibilities are to one another, and what we owe the poorest among us. And into that marketplace, we also, like Paul, are called. And we have to say what we really think, what we know to be true, this good news. That we do in fact have one God who's the source of all things, that holds not all humanity but all creation in life. That we are all siblings, all people, and we owe something to one another. We owe love for one another and care for one another, regardless of our immigration status or race or anything. That's the kind of good news that we have to share. And it runs up against other kinds of news, other kinds of idols. And we can answer those hard questions and not pretend like we actually have the answers. We can just do the best we can. And that might seem really daunting, but one thing I will say about us, and I mean Episcopalians, and not just us, is we're getting a little bit better over time at living with hard questions that we can't quite provide answers to. And the more that we do that together, perhaps it will be welcoming to a seeker who comes in with their own hard questions. And we can sit together and wonder. But at the same time, wonder how we continue to tell this good news. That we are all God's offspring. That God leaves no one orphaned. That same God that holds us all in life. And that we have a responsibility to one another. And part of the reason that we gather to do this is to work that out. Paul says at the end that God doesn't need anything from us, and that's absolutely true. But I still think God might desire from us something. That as we would become God's partners in stepping into this world and embodying as best we can those very deep truths, the good news that we know to be true, of all of our belovedness, of our call to care for one another, that other people, seekers, should know that if they came here, we would recognize a sibling, someone that belongs to us and we to them, and together work out how we can best serve one another in a very complicated world.